Welcome to the deep dive. You're joining us today because, well, you want to get a real handle on Renaissance swordsmanship, specifically the rapier and the cut-and-thrust sword.
Right,
And you want to do it efficiently.
right. Quickly and thoroughly.
Exactly. So think of this as your guided tour through the essential knowledge, a shortcut, if you will.
And our map for this expedition, our source, is John Clements' Renaissance Swordsmanship, the illustrated book of rapiers and cut-and-thrust swords and their use.
Quite the title.
It is, but it's a fantastic resource, packed with details and, crucially, illustrations that really help visualize these weapons in action.
Yeah, those visuals are often essential. So our goal, our mission for this deep dive, it's to pull out the most important aspects of these swords, as detailed in the book, clear up some, common misunderstandings you might have picked up somewhere,
There are plenty of those.
and maybe share a few things that might surprise you. Okay, let's jump right in. Let's tackle a big misconception right off the bat.
Go for it.
Hollywood, rapiers, slashing and hacking away like maniacs.
Ah, yes. The Errol Flynn effect, maybe? The book goes to great lengths to differentiate the rapier, especially the true rapier of the Renaissance period. We're talking roughly 1500 to 1700 AD.
Right.
From both its predecessor and its contemporary, the cut-and-thrust sword. They're related, yes, closely related even, but their design and primary purpose, quite different.
Okay, so it wasn't just like a longer, more elegant sword for chopping things up.
No, not according to Clements, anyway. He argues quite strongly, actually, that the true rapier was primarily designed and optimized for delivering thrusting attacks.
Thrusting, okay.
Yeah. I mean, look at the illustrations in the book. You see these slender, often really sharply pointed blades. They just weren't built for powerful cuts the way a heavier, broader sword would be.
That makes sense when you picture the blade geometry. But were there variations? Did all rapier blades look exactly the same?
No, there were definitely evolutions. Good point. Over time, certain rapier blades did develop wider, sometimes flaring tips. These are occasionally called spadroons.
Spadroons, okay.
And the book notes that these could be used to inflict more of maybe a scratching cut, often aimed at vulnerable spots like the face or hands.
Like a secondary type of attack.
Kind of. And this is really key, the fundamental design, the core fighting style associated with the rapier, as Clements describes it, it stayed centered around the thrust. That was seen as the most efficient, often the most decisive way to end an encounter.
So maybe a cut was possible with some later ones, but the real business end was the point.
Exactly. The point was primary.
Now, something that always catches my eye in those illustrations, the hilts. They're incredibly intricate sometimes. It looks like they're doing more than just looking pretty.
Oh, absolutely. The complex hilts, you see swept hilts, cage hilts, cup hilts, all sorts. They played a vital role.
Which was?
Hand protection. Crucial hand protection. Think about it. In a fighting style that heavily favors thrusting, your hand is often extended out towards the opponent.
Right, makes sense. Vulnerable.
Very. So a robust hilt was absolutely essential for defense. And interestingly, it wasn't just passive protection. The complexity, those bars and rings, allowed for specific parrying techniques. You could use the hilt itself to bind or control the opponent's blade.
Wow, okay. A level of control you wouldn't get with just a simple crossguard.
Precisely. Less feasible with simpler hilts.
The book mentions terms like padon and quillon. Can you break those down?
Sure. The padon, that refers to those small, usually curved bars or loops extending forward from the hilt base just above the grip.
Got it.
And the quillons are the more traditional straight crossguards. Both of them, as the illustrations really show clearly, were instrumental in deflecting an incoming thrust away from the hand.
And maybe trapping the other blade too.
Yes, they could also be used to trap or control the opponent's weapon in certain situations.
Okay, so with these elaborate protective hilts, how did that affect how you actually held the sword? It looks like there were different ways to grip it, shown in the book.
That's right. The book details various grips, all aimed at maximizing control, especially for the thrust.
Like what?
Well, one common method involved looping the forefinger over a quillon or placing it directly on the ricasso.
The ricasso, that's the unsharpened part just above the hilt.
Exactly. That unsharpened section was deliberate. It allowed for this kind of grip, putting the finger over the guard, which gave you more precision and control when you were aiming that point.
Like pointing your finger right at the target.
Sort of, yeah. It enhances leverage and sensitivity. The different hand positions shown really highlight how they adapted the grip for better point control.
Okay, so someone's lunging at you with this sharp pointy rapier. How did you stop yourself becoming a human pincushion? What were the main defensive moves?
Well, the primary defense involved parrying, specifically using the forte of your blade.
Forte. Strong part.
Yes, the stronger part of your blade near the hilt against your opponent's foible, the weaker, more flexible part of their blade out near the point.
Strong against weak. Makes sense.
Exactly, and the illustrations vividly show these parries being made using the edge of your blade, deflecting the incoming thrust away from your body offline.
Sounds very precise.
Yeah.
Very controlled. The book also talks quite a bit about distance and timing in rapier combat. How crucial were those?
Absolutely critical. Given that the rapier's main weapon was the thrust, managing the distance, the measure between you and your opponent, was paramount.
You had to be in range, but not too close.
Precisely. Close enough to land your thrust effectively using the weapon's reach, but not so close that you're easily hit yourself. And timing, well, timing was everything. Recognizing that perfect moment to close the distance and attack, or to execute a parry and maybe a riposte.
A counterattack.
Exactly. Or just to evade. Timing and distance were intertwined.
Now, we often see this in movies, maybe more accurately here. Fighters using a rapier in one hand and something else in the other. Was that common?
Oh, yes, very common. The book explains this well. Employing a secondary item, usually in the left hand, was a standard tactic.
Like what sort of items?
Daggers were very popular, often called poniards, or specifically for the left hand, a main gauche.
Main gauche, left hand, got it.
And also bucklers, small handheld shields. These were frequently used as parrying tools alongside the rapier.
So the dagger wasn't just for stabbing?
Not primarily when used with a rapier, no.
Yeah.
As the illustrations show, the dagger, or main gauche, could be incredibly useful for trapping the opponent's blade, controlling it, even potentially breaking it if the leverage was right.
Wow.
It gave you a vital defensive option and could create openings for your own rapier thrust.
It really paints a picture of a complete two-handed system almost.
Yeah.
Fascinating. But the rapier's time at the top didn't last forever, did it?
No, that's correct. Fashions change, technology changes, fighting styles evolve. By the late 17th century, the rapier started to be superseded by the small sword.
Smaller.
Smaller, lighter, yes.
Yeah.
With an even greater emphasis purely on point control and finesse, it was really a refinement of the thrusting principle.
And then that led somewhere.
It did. The small sword eventually evolved into the modern fencing épée that we recognize today. You can see a pretty direct lineage there, focusing on precision and the primacy of the thrust.
Okay, that gives us a really good look at the rapier. Let's shift gears now to its relative, the cut-and-thrust sword. What sets this one apart?
Well, the name kind of gives it away, doesn't it? The cut-and-thrust sword was designed deliberately to be effective at both cutting and thrusting.
A more versatile weapon, then.
Exactly. It essentially bridged the gap between earlier, often heavier medieval swords that were maybe more cut-focused, and the later, highly specialized rapier.
Okay.
However, and the book is careful about this, the term cut-and-thrust sword itself is a bit ambiguous. It covers a pretty broad range of sword designs from that era, not one single, strictly defined type.
So it's more of a category.
Yeah, think of it like that. It could range from a fairly sturdy broadsword that could still thrust well, to more slender blades that perhaps favored the thrust but still kept effective cutting edges. The spectrum.
So if the rapier was maybe more associated with civilian duels, where did the cut and thrust fit in?
Its versatility made it a really practical choice for the battlefield, particularly against opponents who weren't encased in full plate armor.
Why, particularly then?
Well, a rapier's thrust might struggle against decent armor, right? But the cut-and-thrust sword's ability to deliver a powerful cut made it more adaptable, more useful in a wider variety of military combat situations.
Makes sense. What about the blade itself? How did it typically differ from a true rapier's blade?
Generally speaking, cut-and-thrust blades tended to be shorter, broader, and maybe a bit heavier than true rapiers.
Built more sturdily.
You could say that. They possess edges sharpened and designed for delivering effective cuts. The book actually shows different blade cross-sections.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, highlighting how they tried to balance having good cutting edges with maintaining a strong central spine or ridge for stiffness needed for thrusting.
A real hybrid design. And the hilts. Were they as fancy as the rapier hilts?
Hilt designs varied a lot on cut-and-thrust swords, too, but they generally tended to be less elaborate than the often highly complex and decorated hilts you see on rapiers.
Still offered some protection, though.
Oh, definitely. They still incorporated features for hand protection, things like finger rings, side rings, knuckle bows to guard the wielder's hand. Necessary in any sword fight, really.
So how would you actually use one effectively to take advantage of both the cut and the thrust?
Right, well, for cutting techniques, you'd often use the first third or so of the blade out towards the tip. It's sometimes called the point of percussion.
Like the sweet spot on a bat.
Exactly like that. Hitting with that part maximizes the force and effectiveness of the cut. The book even shows diagrams of various cuts with their Italian names like mantrito,
It's
reverso.
reverso. Okay.
And it emphasizes that effective cutting wasn't just about swinging hard. It required proper edge alignment, hitting with the sharp edge correctly oriented, and using your whole body mechanics to generate power and speed.
So technique was crucial for cutting too, and it's thrusting. How did that compare to the rapier?
Well, cut and thrust swords were certainly capable of thrusting and could be deadly that way, but their wider blades and sometimes less acutely pointed tips generally meant they weren't quite as efficient at delivering those deep, fast, immediately disabling thrusts compared to a rapier.
The rapier was just hyper-specialized for that.
Pretty much. Its slender, stiff, sharply pointed design was simply better optimized for penetration and causing significant internal damage with a thrust.
We talked about bucklers with rapiers. Were they used with cut and thrust swords too?
Absolutely. Bucklers were a very common companion for cut and thrust swords as well. Same reasons, really.
Mobile defense.
Mobile defense, yeah. Great for parrying incoming cuts, which were obviously a bigger threat with these swords. And they could also be used offensively, a punch with the buckler, trapping a limb or weapon, creating openings.
Versatile little things.
They really were. The illustrations in the book show different buckler designs and how they were used in parries and binds with the sword.
It sounds like the cut and thrust was maybe the workhorse sword of the era. More adaptable.
In many ways, yes. Suited for a wider range of potential combat scenarios. And it had a lasting legacy, too.
Oh, how so?
The whole cut and thrust tradition definitely influenced the development of later military swords like sabers and also some of the broader bladed civilian swords that came after the rapier's peak. You see, that continued desire for a weapon that can do both jobs effectively.
Okay, so we've looked closely at both the rapier and the cut and thrust sword. Stepping back a bit, what are some of the maybe overarching themes or really important takeaways from the book about Renaissance swordsmanship in general for our listeners to keep in mind?
I think one of the most crucial themes Clements stresses is the importance of historical context, really understanding it.
Getting past the Hollywood version again.
Exactly. We can't just view these swords through a romanticized theatrical lens or even just based on, say, modern sport fencing. To truly appreciate how they were used, you have to look at how they were designed, how they were held, the specific fighting manuals and techniques developed around their unique capabilities during that specific time, the Renaissance.
Form follows function, basically. Understanding the tool to understand its use.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it.
What else stands out?
Another big thing the book emphasizes is the constant interplay, the dynamic relationship between offense and defense.
It wasn't just block, then attack.
No, not at all. Parrying wasn't just a passive block. Very often, the parry itself was the immediate setup for a counterattack or riposte. It was a fluid system. Defense flowed directly into offense and vice versa, constantly seeking advantage.
Sounds intense.
It was life and death, so yeah, I imagine it was.
And how did these swords and the ways people use them change within the Renaissance itself? Was it static?
Oh, definitely not static. The evolution of both the rapier and the cut and thrust sword reflects the changing needs of combat, both military and civilian.
And maybe social factors too. Dueling customs.
Yes, absolutely. Evolving social customs, ideas about honor, even fashion played a role. The book actually includes something Clements calls a tree of swordsmanship development.
Oh, interesting. Like a flowchart.
Sort of, yeah. It visually illustrates this progression from earlier sword forms through these key Renaissance weapons and then branching out into later developments. It's really insightful for seeing the bigger picture.
Finally, I mean, reading about all these techniques is fascinating, but I guess actually getting good with one of these, that was a whole different ballgame.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Clements makes that crystal clear. Knowing the theory, reading the manuals, that was just the start. Maybe not even the start for some.
Practice makes perfect.
Dedicated, rigorous practice. Consistently learning and refining the correct techniques, ideally under a knowledgeable instructor, that's where true skill came from. Reading the book gives you the what and the why, but only practice gives you the how.
Right. Essential foundation, but application is key. Okay, so to try and wrap this up for everyone listening, what are the absolute key insights to take away about these fascinating swords?
Okay, the main things to remember. Rapiers. Primarily thrusting weapons. They emphasized speed, precision, the deadly point. Their whole design, slender blade, protective hilt, was geared towards landing that effective thrust.
Got it. Rapier pointy.
Pretty much. And cut and thrust swords. They offered much more versatility, a balance between effective cutting blows and the ability to thrust. That made them suitable for a broader range of situations, from civilian self-defense, maybe, to the battlefield.
Cut and thrust Swiss Army knife? Sort of.
Maybe a bit, yeah. But grasping that fundamental difference, Rapier optimized for thrust, cut and thrust being versatile, that really helps clear away a lot of the common myths you see floating around.
And hopefully everyone listening now feels like they've got a solid, efficient understanding of this slice of Renaissance swordsmanship based on Clements' work.
Without having to wade through everything themselves.
Exactly. This deep dive has hopefully been your shortcut to being, well, pretty well informed on the topic.
Indeed. And maybe it leaves you with an interesting thought to chew on.
Oh.
Consider how those core principles, distance, timing, that constant interplay between offense and defense we talked about, how might they resonate or even apply in other areas? Strategy, interaction, maybe even just navigating daily life.
Huh. That's actually quite profound, thinking about fencing principles beyond the sword fight itself.
It's interesting, right? The book's epilogue even touches on these broader aspects. Self-development, self-mastery, things that the serious study of swordsmanship could cultivate, beyond just learning to fight.
That's a truly thought-provoking connection to leave people with. And, of course, if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity,
Which we hope it has.
the John Clements Renaissance Swordsmanship, the illustrated book of rapiers and cut and thrust swords and their use, offers a ton more detail. And as we mentioned, those invaluable visual examples for you to explore further.
Definitely worth checking out if you want to go deeper.